Boy, I love Green Bay. My name's Joseph Jourdain. I'm a blacksmith and gunsmith, and I was born here I was born in Three Rivers, Canada, about 140 years ago. I came here as a young boy when I was 18 years old to work for a fur trader by the name of Jacob Franks and his nephew John Law. They wanted to start up a fur trading company, and they thought that this would be a great place to do it. Jacob Franks was kind of famous because he was one of the few Jewish fur traders here in Green Bay, and they had developed quite the fur trade. When I was born in 1780, that was just between the two wars that America and British England had been in. You had the Revolutionary War in 1776, and then there was another war yet to come in 1812. Well, between those wars, it was kind of peaceful out here, and this area out here in Green Bay really hadn't been claimed yet by either country. England wanted this to become an Indian buffer zone. They wanted Wisconsin and this area on this side of Lake Michigan to belong to the Native Americans, instead of the Americans who wanted to go all the way on up to Lake Superior and to the Mississippi River. So nobody was really sure who owned Wisconsin when we first got here. All I know is that we had the Frenchmen. My father was French. He was born French. In fact, most people who come to Green Bay, when I came, this was their first time coming here. But my father was actually born in Green Bay, and his father was actually a voyager, and he had a place just on the other side of the river up by the fort in the 1740s and the 1750s. So my family's been here for quite a long time. We left, but we decided to come back. Tonight I kind of want to talk a little bit about big dreams and little dreams, and what I see here is the Fox River is a river of dreams. This starts off as a small river, goes into a bigger river, goes into the Great Lakes, and eventually goes to the St. Lawrence River, which goes out to the Atlantic Ocean. And it's 900 miles from here to my original place where I was born at Three Rivers, which is between Montreal and Quebec. But it's all the same water, it's all the same river, it all gathers together. When I got here in 1798, I was only 18 years old, and Mr. Franks and John Law, they built their homes, and they built their trading post, and right next to them I built my blacksmith shop. It's right down by where the waterworks department is today on Mason Street and Ave. So that's right where my house was. As a young boy, I was working hard, but I also kind of fell in love with one of the local girls. There was a young woman by the name of Marguerite who I ended up marrying, and she was the daughter of another fur trader here in town. And as it turns out, Marguerite's grandfather was a Menominee chief. So that'll become very important, because as a Menominee chief, he gave her a very nice wedding gift to get her started once she got a little bit older and married. I had 8 kids, 2 sons who both became blacksmiths, and 6 daughters. And Marguerite is probably the most famous because she married a young missionary that came here with the Oneida, and his name was Eleazar Williams. He became known as the Lost Dauphin of France, and my wife's grandfather ended up giving Mary Magdalene, my daughter, a very nice wedding gift, which was about 1,000 acres on the other side of the river, in which they could start their home, and he could start his own little empire with the Native Americans that he brought with him from New York. So that was kind of interesting. When I was here and I had just gotten married, I was English. I was born English because that's the way it worked. My parents were French, and when the French lost the war, the French-Indian War, to the English, everybody had to become English or go back to France. So my parents decided to become English. I was born English, and when I got here, everybody had English citizenship except for one man, John Dousman, but just about everybody else was English. And after the War of 1812, the rules changed. You had to become American. So that became very interesting because under the old French laws that we had here that we were allowed to use at the time, when we got married, marriage contracts, we got married by contract, and marriage contracts were either 3 or 5 years. And Judge Roumet would make his money by writing the contracts for everybody, because the voyagers who used to come here, they would have 3 or 5 year employment contracts, and it kind of worked out for everybody. But you had to get remarried, and if it wasn't working for you, you just didn't get remarried after 3 years. It was kind of interesting. But once the Americans came here, there was a judge, Judge Doty, and he said that's not going to work anymore. We need to make sure that land is transferred properly and everything. So he rounded up all 35 of us who had been married under the old French rules, and he made us get married under the American rules. So all 35 of us had to go to the courthouse and get married, and that worked out okay for me because I stayed married to Marguerite for another 60 years. So that turned out pretty good. We really liked being here in Green Bay, and one of the challenges when you get married, you're supposed to get married in the church, and the church is 200 miles away, so that really didn't work out very well. And we decided that if we were going to build a community, we wanted to build our own church here in Green Bay. So we started St. John the Evangelist Church down at the bottom of the hill, and that church is still in existence today. We started raising money for that in the 1820s, and by 1831 we had a church built, and then in 1832 the Black Hawk War came. So we had just hired a new missionary. His name was Father Mazzucchelli, and one of the neat things about starting a church and giving people a lot of freedom is they can do a lot of good creative things. And Father Mazzucchelli is currently in line to become one of Wisconsin's only saints. So he's he's up for sainthood right now over through St. John's Church. So in 1831, that's when we started the church. 1832, a year later, there was a Black Hawk War. And as it turns out, the Black Hawk War was started by Chief Black Hawk, who was on the Mississippi River at the mouth of the Wisconsin. And his tribe originally had been from the Green Bay area, but the French had pushed them down to the Mississippi. So they were down at the mouth of the Mississippi, and the Americans pushed them across to the other side of the Mississippi, and they came back over and they wanted to start farming their land again. They didn't like the fact that they had to give it up, and there was a Black Hawk War, and that started, is very famous right now, but that was the last Indian war that we had in the area. And as it turns out that the Sauk and the Menominee were not friends, as they were close when a couple hundred years earlier, and agreed to protect Green Bay from the Black Hawk if they came up this way. So during the Black Hawk War, the Menominee protected Green Bay. They patrolled the southern border, and after the Black Hawk War, the Americans decided that they wanted the Menominees to stay in the area, and they gave them some land at the mouth of the Fox River as it goes into Lake Winnebago, and they started a community down there for them, and I agreed to become their blacksmith. So they agreed to build a sawmill and a blacksmith shop for them and teach them farming skills so that they could become civilized. The Menominee didn't like that, and that didn't work out, and they moved on up the river to another location, and then eventually they moved again up to their current location up by Shawano. But that was a dream that the Americans had for incorporating them into American society, and when that dream failed, the Americans decided that they would just give me, allow me to keep my blacksmith shop and the log cabins that I had built, and I stayed there and I started my own little town, and that town is currently the town of Menasha. So Neenah and Menasha is still today. Here it is 200 years later, and that was something that we started just as a small dream. Well, I did like my time in Menasha. My favorite time was here in Green Bay. And I'll just backtrack one little bit. When my daughter got married, her grandfather decided to give her and her new husband, who was a missionary for the Oneida, quite a bit of land, about 1,000 acres of land just south of what is now De Pere, and that's called the Williams Grant. So she married Eliezer Williams, who was also known as the Lost Dolphin, and that's Lost Dolphin Road. So he was reportedly the lost prince of France, and it turned out not to be true, but that worked for a while. So that's how the family ties all came in. And while I did like being in Menasha, my favorite time here was when I started my blacksmith shop down on the river, and we started the church. So when my wife died, we decided that she'd be buried here in Green Bay, and when I died 2 years later, I was buried next to her in 1868 when I was 18 years old.
Oh.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Questions?
Head back to the road this way, or then go along the hill?
All right.